You know who is the expert driver in my family? Well, that's a loaded question, and none of my family is in here to defend themselves. I'll tell you, it's my kids. My kids, they'll tell me who the better driver is, what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. Annalise is always super concerned about what is the speed limit and how fast are you going, and I tell her, don't worry about that. But they are experts in how driving should be done. Do you know who is the expert on how to raise the perfect children? What'd you say? God? Okay, well, aside from God, it's usually people without any kids. They usually are the people that know. I know before I had kids, I knew exactly what I would and wouldn't do once I had kids, and I knew what everyone else was doing wrong, and I was so surprised that they couldn't see it for themselves. And I knew what the few were doing right, and I was taking notes, but made sure to act like them. I had perfect imaginary kids before I had kids. Who's the perfect quarterback and the perfect coach? If it's not every fan in the stands or in the recliner, it definitely is the sports radio hosts on Monday morning or those that are standing around the water cooler telling stories about what the coach should have done, what the players should have done. Why couldn't they see it? Those refs are blind, obviously. Surprisingly, though, at least in my life, no NFL or college program calls any of us with coaching offers, despite our vast knowledge, our keen insight, and they completely disregard the fantasy football trophies that I have, as well as my Madden Football 2023 score. They don't seem to take that into account. The only other experts that I've met, and they typically know everything, are teenagers. I was a teenager once, and I thought, like, man, I was shocked that people that were 3, 4, and 5 times my age didn't have the things figured out that I had figured out. They hadn't figured out life like I had, and usually teenagers, especially the closer you get to graduating and stuff, like, you kind of know everything, and then you're kind of surprised that the people that raised you, that you're still alive because you know more than they do. More often than not, the reason many do not rely on experts who do not have experience, though, is because they're lacking something. It's an authenticity and contextual understanding. What I mean is they haven't gone through it yet. It's just an idea. I mean, they have a plan, they have a hypothetical situation, they haven't lived in and through the situation, they're not on the other side of it, but they confidently speak about it like they have it all figured out. Now, there's nothing wrong with hypothetical situations that help us think through things and come up with a plan, but there was a modern-day philosopher who said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That was Mike Tyson that said that. Right? Plans are great, but what happens when all of a sudden life hits you in the mouth or someone physically hits you in the mouth? Who's more authentic in the opinions on what to do when you step into the ring? The person who only has a plan of how you should do it, or the person that's been hit in the mouth and is still standing after that event? The reliability and the authenticity of what we offer is certified by our experience. If that is true in something like parenting and driving and even playing professional sports, how true is that when it comes to being agents of healing? This is week 2 of our series, Healing Agents, and today we're going to spend time in the Apostle Paul's second letter to the Christians in and around the city of Corinth. And what we find is this connection between what we endure in the pain and brokenness common to the human experience of life and our ability to authentically understand and share in healing despite the pain. Apostle Paul writes all about this. We're going to pay attention to the first chapter in verses 3 through 7 as we're going to spend our time this morning. Here's what Paul writes. All praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with His comfort through Christ. Even when we are weighed down with troubles, it is for your comfort and salvation. For when we ourselves are comforted, we will certainly comfort you. Then you can patiently endure the same things we suffer. We are confident that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in the comfort God gives us. Two things I want us to note right off the bat here in this passage is first, Paul's assertion that God is the source of all comfort. Like meaningful comfort, real comfort here. You know, comfort can be a bunch of things, but that should really clue us into the reality that disconnected from God, we cannot offer any real comfort as intended by our Creator. Let me repeat that. Disconnected from God, we cannot offer real comfort or true comfort as intended by our Creator. Comfort in, despite its name, has nothing on God, the Creator of you and me. Some things might distract us from pain, other things might numb the pain that we experience, but real comfort that helps us live the life God created us for begins with and is in God. Commentator N.T. Wright explains comfort like this. He says, the whole idea of the word comfort is that one person is being with another, speaking words which change the mood and situation, giving them courage, new hope, new direction, new insights which will alter the way they face the next moment, the next day, and the rest of their life. So that's kind of a bigger picture of comfort, isn't it? Because a lot of times we hear, I'm going to comfort you, and we think like, oh, I'm just going to kind of get a little comfortable. But he's saying it's speaking words, it's comfort that brings a new outlook on life, new hope, new promise. It kind of gives us courage then to face what we're facing. That's what the comfort is that we're talking about here. The second thing I think that we should notice in this passage is that the word comfort is used 9 times in only 5 verses. Now, let's not make any mistake about it. Paul is obsessed for his readers to understand this theme of real comfort and how it flows. Let's break down then, since it's important to Paul. In verse 4, Paul says he comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others. You and I receive comfort so that we can feel like we've been hanging out with the Snuggle fabric softener bear. Is that what he says? Do you remember that? Remember the commercial of the bear? And like, this is back in like the, you have to be over a certain age to remember this, but there's commercials in like the late 80s, early 90s of the bear. And I watched the commercial a couple days ago as I was looking into this. And it's people that are putting on clothes and they have big smiles on because they're just so comfortable. And the bear's kind of just, talking about the fabric softener and how great it is. But sometimes we think of comfort that way, don't we? I mean, in that thing, they're putting on clothes, they're comfortable, they're falling into a bed that's nice and just billowy. We think of comfort that way sometimes, don't we? Soft, easy. Might fall asleep a little bit because we're just so comfortable. So many times our thoughts, though, begin and end with our own life and at our own pain. And so what happens is that we begin to think that God comforts us so that we can be comforted, end of story. But how do you like that? In the middle of this passage, Paul says that we are comforted so that. So that means we were comforted for another reason other than just being comforted ourselves. Now, we will be comforted ourselves, but he says we are comforted so that we can then comfort others. Well, what if I don't want to comfort anybody else? What if I like being comforted and I'm saying, you know what, God, you're going to have to get somebody else because I just can't bring any comfort to them. Whoops. If we do that, then we've just disconnected from the Jesus way of life, which, as we talked about last week, was the way of the wounded healer. That says, I bring healing out of my wounds. My wounds become a place of healing because I'm receiving comfort to those wounds, and I can then share comfort with you because I know what it's like to go through that. Jesus was the one that entered into our pain as an avenue to bring healing. The verse in Isaiah said, by his stripes we are healed. It's not just a clever promise, it's actually a way of life that Jesus lived. and then hands off to us to continue on. And since the way we really comfort exists with God as the source, if we don't lean into Paul's "so that," but instead live disconnected from that way of living, saying, I can't do that, then we're no longer connected to the way, which is Jesus. That's kind of a focus on the negative, so we won't spend a lot of time there. But it's the reality, isn't it? Paul continues by saying, when we are troubled, he says, when we are troubled, we will then be able to share what God has given to us in that moment to you. Verse 6 echoes this idea. He says, even when we are weighed down with troubles, it is for your comfort and salvation. Imagine thinking that, you know what, I'm going through this right now, but there's going to bring purpose out of this because I'm going to be able to tell somebody else, you're going to make it through. God's with you. I've been where you've been. I know what it's like. I understand your pain, but don't give up. For when we ourselves are comforted, we will certainly comfort you. I can imagine a thought that says, but what if when I receive from God, not only fills my cup, but then is able to fill up others? I mean, have we ever been blessed that much where we're saying, I have leftover blessing? That's the picture that Paul is painting here. There's more to the story than you or me by ourselves. Does that mean that we don't matter as an individual? No, not that. Of course not. But what it does mean is that we are also and ultimately created to live in cooperation and partnership with both God and one another to the benefit of others. So sometimes people say, I've been saved, and we know from what, but we don't always know for what. And so Paul is writing the for what. I've been saved for the benefit of others. That's a thought. That could be a game changer if you've never thought about that, because sometimes we think, I'm saved for myself because I was so great that God wanted to save me. And I'd say there's probably some truth in that, but maybe not as much as you might think. But at the same time, you were saved for the benefit of others. Paul gives the analogy of the church being like the human body. Do each of your fingers matter? Yeah, they matter. But do they see their full potential alone or together? Now, I've seen some people that are driving demonstrate that they think one of their fingers is better because they'll hold it up. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the reality that the whole hand achieves far more together than any one finger can achieve. We were created to live in the kingdom of God, joined together as the family of God. And when we lean into that way of living, then the blessing that God gives us, even blessings like comfort for extremely difficult situations that come by the way of experiencing pain, is meant not just for us, but for the whole family. How many of you have heard of Hershey's Chocolate and Louis Zamperini? Anybody? Okay, how many have heard of Hershey's Chocolate? Let's start there. All right, most of you. A couple, I don't know where you've been living. I can introduce you after church if you want to Hershey's Chocolate. But then Louis Zamperini, anybody recognize that name? That's all right, I'm going to tell you about Louis. Louis Zamperini was known as the Torrance Tornado, and he was a track star from California who seemed destined for Olympic gold until World War II broke out. The Olympics were going to be in Japan, and I assume you all know your history enough to know that because of World War II, then Japan would no longer be a suitable place to hold the Olympics. And so Louis joined the Army Air Forces as a bombardier. On the 27th of May, 1943, while on a search for another lost aircraft and crew out in the Pacific, mechanical difficulties caused Louis' plane to crash into the ocean 850 miles south of Oahu, Hawaii, killing 8 of the 11 men that were on board. So it was Louis and 2 other guys. Louis and the 2 other guys who survived the crash, they found a raft to climb onto, and pockets in the rafts contained some survival provisions. Whatever was in those pockets after the crash and after everything that had happened would be all that they'd have until they were rescued. The account of that says this: Louis untied the pocket flaps and looked inside. he found several thick chocolate bars, probably the Hershey Company's military-issued Ration D bars, divided into segments and packaged in wax-dipped containers to resist gas attack. Designed to be unpalatably bitter so soldiers would eat them only in dire circumstances, they were formulated to be high caloric and melt resistant. The package instructions said that each man was to be given 2 segments a day, one in the morning, one in the evening, to be held on the tongue and allowed to dissolve over 30 minutes. I mean, you have to have some patience to let a chunk of Hershey sit on your tongue for 30 minutes. And I assume they were a little bit different, and so they're not very palatable, so that means they probably didn't taste very good. But anyway, that was by design. And so the first night of the crash, they have this crash, this big traumatic event. They find these rafts, they get on them, and they're saying, okay, we have these chocolate bars. They hand out squares for the night, and Louis is put in charge of the rations, and he puts them away. They were committed to survive as long as they could together. Or were they? After the first night, once everyone was awake, Louis went to get the chocolate to give each man their ration for the day. But when he opened the pouch, the chocolate was gone. So overcome by the fear that they wouldn't survive, one of the 3 men ate all the chocolate in his panic, leaving none for the others. What if life in a society and a culture has taught us to treat resources as well as blessings like they are chocolate and we're lost in the ocean of life? So we better just get what we can while we can. That way of thinking that says, look out for number one first, and then if you have leftover, give to other people, that's kind of what culture teaches us, and even that second part of then you can give to other people is kind of up for grabs. Meanwhile, Jesus comes to us with a mindset and a behavior that is not rooted in scarcity, but instead is rooted in abundance, and says, so be generous with what you receive. It's a completely different way of thinking. Sometimes we try to take what we've learned from culture and meld it with what Jesus has taught us, but this is a completely different way of thinking. One way says, man, you got to watch out. You're not going to make it. Go and eat that chocolate. So even though the comfort we receive might seem like just a little bit in the moment that we dare not give away because we're going to run out, Jesus teaches us both in the what he said as well as the way that he lived to give freely what we receive freely from God and from others, because he has an abundance and he will continue to give to us. That was the whole test in the desert with manna, was the idea of God would give them enough to make it through the day, but they had to come back to him the next day for more. And if you tried to hoard it, what would happen? It would rot. And the idea is teaching dependence day by day. And even though all we can see is what we have in our hand, God teaches us a way through the life of Jesus to give what we have because he has more. In verse 5, Paul says, for the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with this comfort through Christ. More real comfort doesn't come from a higher thread count in our clothes or in our sheets or a bear that's hawking fabric softener. More comfort comes in the pain that we traverse. Our capacity for blessing, where did I miss that? Somewhere. Our capacity for the blessing of comfort is enlarged by our painful experiences. Oh, there we go. Imagine that. Our capacity for the blessing of comfort is enlarged by our painful experiences. The more pain you go through, the greater your capacity for comfort is. Not only to receive, but to give. Someone else might say, the more screwed up you are, the more grace that you receive from God, and then you're able to give more grace. We would hope that it would work that way, but sometimes what happens is we forget how messed up we were, and we start to judge everybody else and say, why aren't they better than they are? Well, let's take a picture and let's hold up a mirror to how you were before you met Jesus. Because you needed grace too. Don't forget that as you receive grace, that you're to then give that to others. I was just talking about in our Spark Group leader meeting this week about, I had a cousin tell me once, how did he word it? I'm going to mess it up. He said, I want to give people the grace that I hope they would give me if the roles were reversed. What if we thought like that? Instead of saying, why did they do that? They're so messed up. Can you believe what they're doing now? We'd say, man, you know what? If the roles were reversed, I would hope that someone would have some grace for me. I would hope that someone would give me the benefit of the doubt and not automatically come to the conclusion that I was looking to mess somebody over. Our capacity for the blessing of comfort is enlarged by our painful experiences. Not only does that increase our holding tank for comfort, but it creates an authenticity that we then share with others and saying, let me tell you what helped me. If it helps you, then great. Henry Nouwen, the Christian author, you're going to have to jump there, Jimmy, because I can't. There we go. Thanks. The Christian is called to recognize the sufferings of their time in their own heart and make the recognition the starting point of their service or their ministry. Their service will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from a heart wounded by the suffering about which they speak. That's a very grammatically correct way of saying when people talk about things, we consider it authentic if you've actually been through it. And so he's saying the point of ministering out of our wounds is being able to say, I've been there. And the stuff I'm telling you isn't just an idea. It's not just a hypothetical. It's not just some plan that I have if that ever happens. It's the exact thing that I actually went through. Authenticity in ministering with comfort for the wounds of life comes from the heart that itself has been wounded and is being comforted by Christ. That's the point of what Paul is writing here. The expertise, like identification or certification that says this is authentic, comes from the experience that we have. Experience will always certify us as a subject matter expert. And Paul is saying it'll certify you for the blessing in the form of comfort that is received and in turn shared. It is in the process of learning to live in this receive and pass it on lifestyle by the empowering of the Holy Spirit that other passages, I think, that we read come into full view. Think of Galatians chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. Paul wrote this, share one another's burdens and in this way obey the law of Christ. If you think you are too important to help someone, you are only fooling yourself. You are not that important. That's kind of a way of saying, like, bear one another's burdens. Some people might say, put up with one another. You ever had a parent say that to you, or someone, like, kids are kind of fighting, say, can't you guys just get along? I think that might be a way that Paul's writing here. Because he's saying, if you think you're too important to help someone, he's saying, don't forget who you are or who you were. You are not that important. You're fooling yourself if you think you can't help anybody else because you've needed help. We live this out when we share the grace and comfort Christ has given to each of us with those around us, thanks to God, who is the source of it all to begin with. Then in the midst of pain and suffering and the wounds of life, those blessings are like life-saving chocolate, giving us hope despite the circumstances that I can make it another day. You ever been with somebody that's going through a really tough time? And a lot of times what happens is your view of life starts to shrink. And the reason is because it's so difficult that sometimes you have to say, if I can make it through today, that's what I want to focus on. If it's really difficult, you might say, if I can make it through this hour, then I can make it to the next hour. Sometimes when you're in the midst of things, I think of a plane crash would be one of those, where you're thinking, man, if I can make it through this minute, then I can make it to the next. If I can make it through this minute, I'm going to focus on surviving for this minute, then I can focus on the next minute. And so when we share comfort, it can be one of those things where it's like that life-saving chocolate, or it might not be this overabundance, but it might be the thing that gets us through what we're going through in the moment. This idea of being part of being an agent of healing is living connected to the great healer, partnering with him in his mission to share blessings to the people in our world. That's the for that lifestyle. We are blessed to be a blessing. Now, you'll meet plenty of people and they'll say, well, I'm blessed. I think the best way to show you're blessed isn't by how nice your house and your car are, and those things are all fine, but how you're able to help other people. Blessings such as comfort, authentic understanding, as well as love and pointing others to the source of it all, is the way that God has designed this relationship. When we recognize this, it gives us purpose and hope in the midst where we can look and feel like we're in random chaos of the world. Sometimes we need that, don't we? Have you ever played the game Chutes or Ladders? Or Chutes and Ladders? I said Chutes or Ladders. I think it's Chutes and Ladders, right? Is there ever a more chaotic game where there's no rhyme or reason to whether you win? I mean, it doesn't matter. There's no skill to it. You roll a dice and whoop, all of a sudden you're going up a ladder. And it's like, then someone else rolls a dice and you're going down a chute. You're back at the beginning. Sometimes life feels like you're playing Chutes or Ladders. Like God's just sitting back rolling the dice, and you ended up, boop, you went up the ladder. There's your neighbor, they went down a chute. And you're like, what in the world happened there? And then the next time you're going down a chute, and someone else is going up a ladder. And it's like, so what happens is in the midst of something like this, when we receive comfort and share comfort with one another, is that we're able to share purpose and hope when it seems like there's only chaos. Like, hey, this happened, but that doesn't have to define what's going on. You can still have hope, and you can have the courage to face what you're going through because God has a plan. According to Paul, the pain we experience as a result of sinful choices, as well as living in a sinful, broken world, can be endured when we share comfort because it gives purpose. It doesn't mean that God causes all of our pain, but it does mean that God can use those experiences to bring good in the form of healing and comfort to us and through us. What if instead of eating all the chocolate on the raft of life, we learned to share the comfort that gives us courage and hope from Christ? What if in receiving comfort, it wasn't just to get through what we're going through, but it's to give us the courage to face it and the hope that we can make it through it? And then what if on the other side we're able to share that with others? What if we became experts in sharing comfort and blessings from God instead of becoming experts in hypothetical ideas? What would that look like in your life and in my life? The way that we get certified or licensed in sharing true comfort as healing agents of God is in enduring troubles and receiving comfort from the source of real comfort, Jesus Christ. And so when we sing songs that say our hope is in Him, it's because it is. When we sing songs or talk about the fact that we can have courage to face another day because we know there's more to life than what we see or what we're experiencing, then we can share that with others because it's the reality that we've experienced. And when we share that with others, that's truly living a Jesus life. When we tell people, I know what you're going through. I understand it. Here's what gave me comfort. Here's what gave me hope. Here's what gave me courage. And it starts with God. Sometimes it feels like God's nowhere to be seen when we're going through the worst times of our life. But that's the exact moment that Jesus is with us, carrying us day by day. We don't only need reminded of that, we need to remind others from a place that says, I've been there, and God will never leave you. Will you stand with me?